more often than not, horror is extremely reliable when it comes to box office. Take the insatiable appetite of us horror fans and mix that with the generally low cost of producing so many horror films, and bingo! Studios usually have an easy money spinner on their hands, regardless of a film's quality. And while most successful horror movies spawn at least a sequel or two, there comes a time when a sequel inevitably brings a halt to an IP, and that is what the focus is on here today. I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here are the horror movie sequels that killed franchises. Paranormal Activity: Next of Kin. In 2015, Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension, the sixth movie, was meant to bring Paranormal Activity to an end. And to be fair, it was clearly about time. The law of diminishing returns had realistically kicked in with the fourth film. Of course, The Ghost Dimension was a total mess, a barely coherent story with a garish 3D gimmick tacked on as an act of desperation, and it became the lowest grossing of all the Paranormal Activity movies. Even then though, the film still took home $79 million worldwide, from a budget of just $10 million, again highlighting how even awful horror movies can spin a very solid profit. Anyways, skip ahead to 2021 and Paramount decided that, yep, we needed a seventh film, a standalone sequel. That would be Paranormal Activity: Next of Kin. Heading straight to streaming because pandemic, this was a tepid, unoriginal, embarrassingly cliched movie that added zero to the franchise. Bad enough that even its own producer, Jason Blum, called the film terrible and assured audiences that Paranormal Activity, it was being totally shelved. Well, at least for now. Sinister 2. When Sinister released in 2012 and took home nearly $90 million from a measly $3 million budget, yeah, it was no surprise that a sequel was quickly given the green light. But without original director Scott Derrickson in the director's chair this time, instead serving as a co-writer with Kieran Foy directing, Sinister 2 ultimately felt like nothing more than a slapdash half-arsed paycheck gig for Derrickson and fellow returning co-writer C. Robert Cargill. And this was seemingly reflected in Sinister 2's commercial performance, taking nearly half the box office of the first movie, but made for over 3 times the budget. Much like Jason Blum with Next of Kin, Scott Derrickson has since admitted he and Cargill dropped the ball on Sinister 2, though he has at times expressed interest in maybe returning to the franchise at some point. However, given how it's now been a decade since Sinister 2, and Derrickson and Cargill are busy with the likes of the Black Phone franchise, Sinister, it remains as dead as a dodo. Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Considering how much of a huge mainstream hit Gremlins was, it's genuinely surprising to realise that it took 6 years for a sequel to hit the big screen. That would be Gremlins 2: The New Batch in 1990. After years of struggles to find a suitable director for the sequel, original director Joe Dante agreed to return to the fold, solely on the conditions of having full creative control and more than triple the first film's budget. The end result is one of the most gloriously unhinged sequels of all time, a cartoonish parody of both the first movie and of Hollywood sequels in general. Not to mention we've got some truly astonishing practical effects here. To some, The New Batch is one of the greatest sequels ever made, but for other audiences at the time, it was deemed a more goofy experience that lacked some of the horror elements of its predecessor, resulting in it being a box office bomb, taking just over $40 million from a budget that was believed to be as much as $50 million all in all. And given how Gremlins took a mammoth $212 million, yep, Warner Brothers decided to put the franchise to bed. Hannibal Rising. Right, okay, this one technically is not a sequel, but it is a follow-up all the same. 1986's Manhunter was the first adaptation of Thomas Harris's Hannibal Lecter novels, though it was obviously 1991's The Silence of the Lambs that made Hannibal a pop culture phenomenon. That itself saw more of Harris's work taken to the big screen with Hannibal and Red Dragon, both commercially successful in their own rights. And then, then we have 2007's Hannibal Rising, an adaptation of a prequel novel that Thomas Harris didn't even want to write in the first place. In fact, the only reason he agreed to write that was because producer Dino De Laurentiis threatened to hire another writer if Thomas Harris did not do it. So, we've a lack of creative energy, a lack of real want from the writer here. There's a total absence of Anthony Hopkins, of course, because it's a prequel, and it's no surprise then that Hannibal Rising was a critical and commercial failure. Now 18 years since its release, which that makes me feel really old, we've not had a single other Hannibal movie since, with the IP only living on through the short-lived but brilliant Mads Mikkelsen starring TV series. Yeah, and then there's the also disappointing, scrapped after one season, Clarice Series 2. Hostel Part 3. For better or for worse, and let's face it, it is for worse, Eli Roth's Hostel is one of the films so often credited with popularizing the whole torture porn subgenre, with an emphasis on prolonged, brutal pain and suffering, and not in the Hellraiser way either. That first Hostel film did a cracking number at the box office, turning $82 million from a $4.5 million budget. And Hostel Part 2, it did solid enough, less than half the original, but still decent enough, though not enough for Eli Roth to stick around though, with him deciding to exit the franchise when Hostel Part 3 came around, a film that went straight to video in 2011 and featured 0 returning characters from the previous 2 movies. That threequel was rightly panned by fans, and it received barely any attention even from critics, doing so poorly that Sony seemingly just decided to, yep, no, peace out, we're giving up on this franchise. Blair Witch. For those of us around at the time, it is hard to fully put into words just how much a phenomenon the Blair Witch Project was back in 1999. An age where the internet was still a shiny new toy. An age where everything you saw online, it was taken as fact, because why would people make things up, right? It was just absolutely genius, as reflected by a box office of nearly $250 million for a movie that had an initial budget of no more than $60,000. Just insane, think of those numbers. And so, while it was no surprise that a sequel happened, it was certainly a choice to go with a conventionally formed sequel rather than another found footage film. That would be Book of Shadows Blair Witch 2, which arrived 1 year later. The reviews were rough, the box office was way down, and the whole Blair Witch stuff just kinda drifted away after that. The burgeoning franchise put to bed after just 2 movies. That was until the property was resurrected in 2016 with Blair Witch, a direct sequel to the original, shot in secret and directed by the usually great Adam Wingard. I mean, Adam Wingard, you've got You're Next and The Guest as just 2 fantastic films to his name. The marketing for Blair Witch, it was also pretty decent, building up the mystique around the film. Only, sadly, for the end result to be just so disappointing. The writing just feeling a little off, and a lot of the movie just feeling like a lazy rehash of the original film. To the point that Blair Witch it even took home less at the box office than the awful Book of Shadows, which, let's face it, that says a lot, killing all plans and any appetite for further sequels, even if a reboot has kind of been spinning its wheels on and off since 2022, but that is never seen the light of day, let's face it. Poltergeist 3. Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg's Poltergeist is not only an exceptional horror movie, it made a total killing at the box office, particularly by horror standards at the time of its release in 1982. Granted, Poltergeist 2 The Other Side, which released in 1986, yeah, that underperformed financially, but it still turned enough of a profit for a 3rd movie to be produced. Unfortunately, that 3rd film is one tinged in sadness, mainly due to the tragic death of young Heather O'Rourke during post-production at just 12 years of age. It is absolutely heartbreaking, even all these years later. Director Gary Sherman, not to mention the rest of the cast and the crew, were naturally despondent about completing Poltergeist 3, which now required a new ending to be shot, and resulted in a very obvious body double being used in place of Heather. By the time Poltergeist 3 finally made it to cinemas, it was critically panned and a financial disaster, taking home just $40 million, which was barely 10% of the box office of the original Poltergeist. The critical lambasting, the dreadful box office, and just the entire sad tragedy of the production, that was enough to call time on the Poltergeist movie franchise back then. Yes, a remake was pushed out in 2015, but yeah, that was extremely meh, as bang average remakes go, which then that prompted MGM to once again make the IP dormant. Megan 2.0, one of 2022's surprise box office hits. It was hoped that the bigger budget sequel to Megan would repeat that same success. Spoilers, it totally did not. Compared to Megan's box office haul of over $180 million, Megan 2.0 didn't even cross the $40 million line, being made as well for double the budget of that first movie. One of the big issues with Megan 2.0 was the decision to shift the tone towards goofier sci-fi action comedy, all at the expense of the horror aspects that made the first movie so effective and so popular. Meaning plenty of those who did show up to watch Megan 2.0, they were left disappointed, and plenty of other people, they just simply opted to, nope, stay away. And so it now looks extremely unlikely that Blumhouse will move forward with the previously planned third main Megan movie. Though erotic thriller spin-off Soulmate, that has already been shot and will release early next year, and that will surely be the last we'll see of this fumbled IP. Dr. Sleep. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining never needed any sort of sequel whatsoever, being a one-off masterpiece that did everything that story needed to do. Of course, Hollywood loves nothing more than adapting Stephen King novels, and so, when King penned a follow-up in the form of Dr. Sleep in 2013, yeah, that was always going to be spun for the big screen at some point. To be fair, once the great Mike Flanagan was brought on board to write and direct, and with Ewan McGregor signed on to play the adult Danny Torrance, it was kinda tough not to be excited for this. And you know what? Mike Flanagan and his team, his cast, his crew, they absolutely delivered a very worthy follow-up to The Shining. Unfortunately though, Dr. Sleep flopped big at the box office, grossing $72 million from a budget that was around $55 million, to the point that all plans for a direct sequel focusing on the Abra Stone character and a prequel revolving around Dick Halloran, yeah, both of those movies were totally scrapped by Warner Brothers. The ABCs of Death 2. The ABCs of Death is a frustratingly short-lived horror anthology franchise, centered around a very, very simple but a very, very fun gimmick, where each anthology is made up of 26 short films, and each of those short films is inspired by a different letter of the alphabet, such as, say, T is for toilet. The first ABCs of Death received fairly mixed reviews at the time, but it did well enough that a sequel happened and arrived, which, while received more positively, it did struggle commercially, with the producers blaming fans who, instead of buying the movie, paying to watch the movie, they decided that, nah, we're just going to pirate this one, we're going to watch it illegally on streaming. As a result, the planned ABCs of Death 3 was never made, and instead we got the ABCs of Death 2.5. Because the ABCs of Death 2.5 came in and went without making too much of a dent back in 2016, there's been zero real movement since, which is a real shame, man, since the concept of the series, it is so darn fun, begging for some sort of revival on a platform such as Shudder, just saying.